Okay, I think this means that we're live. All right. Okay, so apparently there's nobody here yet. All right, in any case, in this live stream, let me just open up the Paint app. In this live stream, we're just basically going to have open-ended, relaxed conversation about the alchemical symbols, right? The astrological alchemical symbols. So now, what are the astrological alchemical symbols? I mean, we all know these. These are, for example, Venus, Mars, etc. Right. So now we're going to basically have a conversation about the interpretation of these symbols. And so for this, we're going to be, again, making reference to alchemy. And we're going to be making reference to such systems as the Golden Dawn or the Kabbalah. So let us go down to I do believe it is page 98. Page 98. By the way, this is the Golden Dawn by Israel Regardie. So, yes, this is a Vedic astrology channel, but we do also make reference to Western occultism when we feel like it's relevant. After all, astrology does not exist in a vacuum. All right, so if you notice something about the symbols, right? A lot of these alchemical symbols are repetitions of the same symbolism, the same basic symbolism. We have the circle on top and the cross on the bottom. The circle on top, for example, is supposed to represent the sun. It is something that is solar. And the cross on the bottom is supposed to represent the earth, for example. So Venus, for example, is outwardly solar because it has the sun on top, but it is inwardly corrosive because it has the cross on the bottom. So from the outside, it is solar, it is bright, and from the inside, it is dark and corrosive. The cross represents the earth and represents the seasons. You know, you see these 4 quadrants over here, they represent the seasons, right? So, for example, let us see what the Golden Dawn says of these symbols. Let's read down here. Okay, let's start over here. The circle denotes sun and gold. The crescent, the moon and silver, respectively, analogous to the red and white alchemical natures. The cross is the symbol of corrosion. The corrosion of metals is usually of the complementary color to that to which they naturally approximate. Thus, copper, which is reddish, becomes green in its corrosion of verdigris. Mercury is the only planet which unites these 3 primary forms in one symbol. Saturn is composed of the cross and the crescents. So let's come over here and let's see. Saturn is composed of the cross on top, and the crescents. The crescents. It is this. Saturn is outwardly corrosive and inwardly lunar because it is the cross on top and the crescent in the bottom. So let us go back here. Saturn is composed of the cross and the crescent, showing that lead is corrosive internally and Luna externally. Jupiter is the reverse. Okay, here, I don't know what is happening because it's not supposed to be like that because, I mean, as you can see, let's even go to the internet right now. Let's go to the internet. Saturn glyph. No, Saturn is the cross on top and the moon in the bottom, so it's outwardly corrosive. It is outwardly corrosive. let me see if I can get the chat going over here. I don't even know if there's anybody. If there's anybody there, say hi. Write something. Right. So it's the cross on the top and it's the crescent in the bottom. So it's supposed to be outwardly corrosive and inwardly lunar. So I'm not exactly sure what Israel Regardi has written down here. Basically, all other Golden Dawn things, they don't say that. And Jupiter is the reverse. What is Jupiter's glyph? Jupiter's glyph is... It is the moon on top and the cross in the bottom. Jupiter is outwardly lunar and inwardly corrosive. Let us continue. Mars is solar internally, but corrosive externally. The glyph of Mars, once again. Mars is outwardly corrosive. It has the cross on top. And inwardly solar. It has the sun in the bottom. Mars's glyph. Oh, it's that side. Made a mistake. In any case, it is the cross on top and the circle in the bottom. Let us go back. Venus is the opposite. Venus is the opposite of Mars. Copper is externally of the nature of gold, but internally corrosive. Hence, the name of the sphere of Venus is Noga, denoting external splendor, but internal corruption. Noga, this is again more Western occultism, but look at this interpretation. It denotes external splendor, but internal corruption. Hi. If you guys have any questions, please write it down. But actually, before we continue, I hope the volume is okay. Before we continue, let us come up with a few interpretations of these symbols. I mean, let's start with Jupiter, for example. Let's do Jupiter. Jupiter is the moon on top and the cross in the bottom. What do you think this means for Jupiter to be lunar externally but corrosive internally? So here are one of the many interpretations of this, right? What do we know of Jupiter? Jupiter is the planet of knowledge. Let me take out the notepad out here. Notepad. Let me make this a little bigger. What do we know of Jupiter? Jupiter is a planet of knowledge. But Jupiter more so represents knowledge that is given to you, not knowledge that you go out into the fields and extract for yourself. Jupiter is knowledge that is given to you, lunar. Because usually when we think of the moon, pardon my drawing, I know usually when we think of the moon, we think of things that are given, that we give or are given to us, right? Jupiter is a planet of knowledge that is given to us, but there's a deception in the knowledge that Jupiter gives us. You know, when you read a book, when you listen to a podcast, when you listen to a speaker, you hear what that person is saying, you were deceived into thinking that you understand what that person is talking about, but the truth is that you don't actually understand. True understanding comes from contemplation. And contemplation takes time. It takes time. You know, you listen to a very basic statement. I don't even know what basic statement to use. Let's think of a basic saying that we have globally. Time heals all wounds. All right, let's take a basic statement like that. One receives a basic statement like that. One is deceived into thinking that one understands the statement, but only through long contemplation, only through having lived a life, having experimented with various techniques of how to get over things, that you may come to a deeper understanding of this statement. Because this statement, just like this, can sound quite empty. You know what I mean? But through time, you can extract something deeper from it. And so that is what we mean when we say that Jupiter is lunar externally, but corrosive internally. Being corrosive is, again, related to the Earth, right? It's related to the Earth and related to the seasons and related to efforts, related to time, and related to suffering. All true knowledge, all true understanding is experience base. Of course, the cross also represents experience. It tells you that Jupiter is not complete in a person if all you ever do is receive and receive and receive and receive. If you're only ever receiving knowledge, if you're only ever reading books, but you're never really, picking up your own pencil and writing down your own thoughts and really investigating your own ideas. If you're only ever reading books and listening to people, but you're not going out into the world and really experimenting those ideas, really coming face to face with the truth of those ideas, then your Jupiter is not complete. This gives us one very basic interpretation of a badly placed Jupiter, for example. A badly placed Jupiter in a person, one interpretation is that that person only reflects the lunar aspect of Jupiter, constantly receiving, never really experimenting, never really going out there and really experimenting. But another interpretation of a badly placed Jupiter is somebody who only has the cross aspects but does not have the lunar aspects. Because guess what? If you're somebody who you don't have teachers, you don't have guides, you don't have fathers, you don't have uncles, you don't have mothers. When you're somebody who you do not have access to a lot of knowledge, and every single piece of knowledge that you get, you always have to work for it. It's always a struggle. That is another expression of a badly placed Jupiter. So here we're having two expressions of a badly placed Jupiter. One of them is only ever receiving, relating strictly to the lunar aspect, and another badly placed aspect is never receiving, never having access to being able to receive knowledge and having to discover knowledge very, very slowly all by yourself. You know what I mean? Jupiter is at its best when you simultaneously receive knowledge and you also contemplate it. Let me try to refine this a little bit. First and foremost, let me write down here negative expressions of Jupiter. One negative expression is, my shift button's not working. One negative expression is only being lunar. Another negative expression is only being corrosive. So only being lunar again means only ever receiving. For the time being, let's just write that. Again, I apologize. My shift button is malfunctioning. And another negative expression of Jupiter is only being corrosive, never receiving and having to discover on one's own. Maybe later on we can come up with a better phrase, a more elegant phrase, but for right now we'll just write this. But Jupiter at its best is both at its best is both receiving and doing. No, we're not saving this. Is both receiving and doing. When you read the Bible, when you read the Bhagavad Gita, when you read the Upanishads, when you read the Quran, when you have teachers, when you have people that give you words, give you statements, give you aphorisms, give you sayings, those sayings, they spin in your mind. And the treasure behind those statements, the true essence behind those statements is slowly revealed through time. It's as if these sayings and these things that you read, they are like seeds into your mind. And actually, the idea of seeds is very interesting when we consider the moon, because the moon is a planet that is often related to plants and to cultivation and stuff like that. Whenever you are given these wise words, they are like seeds implanted in your mind. And through the experiences of life represent the seasons, the sun, the rain that falls onto that seed and that allows it to germinate. Right? And then from years of germination, you gain true and actual understanding. All right, then. Do you guys have any other interpretation? Because I'm actually very curious to hear what you guys' interpretation could be of Jupiter being, let me do it again, Jupiter being the moon on top and the cross in the bottom. I'm coming to the chat right now because I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say. Jupiter glyph, yes. The moon on top and the cross on the bottom. Let me come up here. Jupiter is Guru, but Shukra, Venus too, Guru of Asuras. That's probably because of inner corrosion too. Venus gives a good teacher like Jupiter because of inner suffering. All right, Lersco says, I have a question regarding nakshatras and the tarot. Do you know any resources talking about the connection between those two systems? I've seen you mention examples like Ardra and the Lovers. The reason I mention Ardra and the Lovers is because we're running away from our topic a little bit, but let me just quickly do this. Let me just quickly help you. You know what? Let me just go to this website over here. I like this website. For those of you who are interested in Western occultism and the Kabbalah, this website up here, No Fate in the Human Race, very cynical, is a good resource. Lars Co, you're asking how did I connect Ardra to the Lovers? I connected Ardra to the Lovers because Gemini is connected to the Lovers. Here is Gemini, and Gemini is connected to the Lovers card. Another reason why I connected Ardra to the Lovers specifically within Gemini is because the deity of Ardra, Rudra, is the deity that divided himself, right? He divided himself into man and woman, which facilitated, relations between them, etc. Do I know any resources that connect the tarot to the nakshatras? No, I do not know any resource because Kabbalah only goes as far as the signs. Kabbalah only goes as far as the signs. This is a really cool website for those of you who are interested in Western occultism. You should check it out. Lursko is asking, Orkritika, the strength, if I'm not mistaken, are you planning on expanding on this topic sometime in the future? Sure. Yeah, I am planning on doing that. Aditi says, self-navigation basically my whole life. Okay. RHM666 says, you can have your own interpretation and see the connection once you get the basic symbolism behind each. I don't think there are formal ones yet, formal resources. All right, but you guys don't have any interpretations of Jupiter being lunar externally and corrosive internally. That's what I came to the chat to see. All right, then. Let's move on to Saturn then. What is Saturn? Saturn is the cross on top and the moon in the bottom. Yes, this is what Saturn is. Saturn is the cross on top and the moon in the bottom. Or as Israel Regardie would put it, Saturn is composed of the cross and the crescents. All right. Now let us go. So now for Saturn, it would be the opposite, wouldn't it? Saturn would be the opposite. Saturn is a planet of suffering. It is also the planet of ignorance. Traditionally speaking, it is the planet of ignorance. The planet of death. What else? Various of these things. The planet of experience as well. Because it is the cross on top. This is the inverse of Jupiter. So Saturn starts off with less. It starts off with struggle, with going things on, yes, through living life, not really having access to many resources and really having to experiment on one's own. Saturn is actually also connected to science in the scientific field. And through the cycle of experiences, this is the cross, right? And this represents the seasons. Through the cycle of experiences, sun, rain, winter, fall, summer, spring, etc., one extracts from one's experiences wisdom. The juice of one's experiences is wisdom. So cross on top, moon in the bottom, and the juice is wisdom. So Saturn at its best is that. But now, what is Saturn at its worst? Saturn at its worst is only one or the other. One interpretation is either one or the other. So Saturn at its worst is either the cross alone, either just the cross, or just the moon. It is either one only lives life suffering, one only lives life in ignorance, but one never extracts the juice of one's experiences. Listen, There are many people who are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70s, and instead of wisdom, all they have is trauma. I often ask the question, what is the difference between wisdom and trauma? Because both the wise person and the traumatized person, they both go through experiences, but they each extract something different from experiences. So let us explore this idea together. I was one time at a store. I went there with a friend. I went there with two friends, two female friends. I was just accompanying them, right? And then in that store, one friend was helping the other friend pick a dress, something like that. And the store assistant said something to the effect of, don't trust female friends. They will betray you. And when she said this, to herself, she sounded wise. To herself, she sounded experienced. But now I ask, this statement, does it sound really like a wise statement, or does it sound like the statement of a person who's been traumatized before? What is the difference between trauma and wisdom, really? One way perhaps of differentiating the two is as follows. Wisdom takes into account various perspectives. Like, for example, if you've gone through something painful in life, you say, you know what? This one person has hurt me. I recognize that there's pain in this world, but I also recognize that there are many different types of relationships. You know what I mean? I've suffered in this female friendship, but just because I've suffered in this female friendship does not mean that all female friendships are necessarily bad. Right? That is more so a wise person's way of thinking. They internalize this experience of pain that has come from this specific relationship, but they do not project that upon everybody. As opposed to a more traumatized response, which would be something like, "Oh, I've had two negative experiences with these two female friends. That means that all female friends are bad." So the traumatized person is going to take these few experiences and is going to project these few negative experiences upon everybody. Whereas the more wise approach is to recognize two negative experiences, the negative experiences that you do have, but also recognizing that that's not everything, And so one negative expression of Saturn having the cross on top is one who simply suffers and yet remains ignorant, because they never extract the juice of their experiences, right? Negative manifestations of Saturn. Negative manifestations of Saturn. All right. So now, based on this glyph, what could we think of a few negative manifestations of Saturn that are specifically related to its lunar aspects? Saturn normally is the planet that goes through experiences first, and then from those experiences, it extracts knowledge and wisdom, whereas Jupiter is the opposite. Jupiter is first given great knowledge and given great wisdom. No, excuse me. Jupiter is given great knowledge and great learning, but that very same learning and that very same knowledge that Jupiter is given, it can only be revealed to himself through actually living life, Let me check the chat over here to see if there's anything different. Jupiter's symbol only heard mentioned as either the number 24 or a sickle signifying plentiful harvest. The Jupiter also looks like a 24, 2 moon and 4 Rahu. Okay, that's interesting. I've never seen that before. What's the topic? Is Uttara Phalguni the nakshatra of cheaters? I would not say that Uttara Phalguni is the nakshatra of cheaters, but Uttara Phalgunis definitely do have a lot of options, and I suppose with a lot of options, there's that possibility. But traditionally speaking, it's not really the nakshatra of cheaters. And adding the 2 gets 6, Venus, which is blessings. So excited for this. Also Saturn, the planet of the lower classes of society. Yes, Saturn is also the planet of the lower classes of society. Let's go back to this. So you guys, I'm actually waiting for you guys' interpretation. You guys are letting me interpret these things all by myself. I wanted this to be something that was more like for all of us to participate in. Can you guys think of any negative manifestations of Saturn that specifically relates to its lunar aspects? Okay, so one interpretation of Saturn relating to its cross aspects is only ever suffering and yet remaining ignorant because you never extract anything useful from your experiences. But one negative manifestation of Saturn relating to its lunar aspect is extracting the wrong lessons from one's experiences. Can I make this bold here? Let me make this bold. Oh no. Forget about it. Forget about it. I made everything bold. Extracting the wrong lessons. Because here's the thing about trauma. Trauma is obviously very, very painful. So many of us go through trauma. But trauma is an expression of ignorance. Because trauma does not take into account the full picture of reality, you know? It does not take into account the full picture of reality. So one negative expression is not extracting any knowledge at all. Another negative expression is extracting false knowledge, because unfortunately many of us do go through life's experiences and we carry false knowledge. Instead of life's experiences expanding our understanding of reality, expanding our understanding of humanity, it can actually, limit us. It can actually limit us. All right, let's check the chat. Negative expressions of Saturn then results in the mind, symbolized by the moon. Overgeneralizing expected reactions from traumatic experiences, we should also look at Saturn's mother in the lore. Oh, that's very interesting. First and foremost, we're in the same vein about traumatic experiences. And also, Saturn's mother. Okay. Aditi says, select the text and Control B. Select the text and Control B. I'm not sure if that works in Notepad. Or maybe I'm doing it wrong. Overcoming Saturn's obstacles would then result in clear perception in a way of a developed Ajna chakra would as well. All right, that's interesting. Okay. Now let's do Venus. Venus is the sun on top, so it's outwardly solar, and it is the cross in the bottom, and so it's inwardly corrosive. And so it's outwardly solar. Let me write this. Outwardly solar and inwardly corrosive. Or as Israel Regardi likes to refer to it, he says, Venus is externally splendorous but internally corrupted. There's something else that he said somewhere down here, I think. All right. So let me make this bigger, maybe. Any ideas, you guys? Any ideas? I really want to hear you guys' ideas. About Venus. So I'm just going to wait a few seconds or a couple of minutes so you guys can tell me what you guys think about Venus. Venus is outwardly solar and inwardly corrosive. What does this suggest about Venus? What does this suggest about Venus's nature? What do we know about Venus? Venus is a planet of indulgences. It is a planet that indulges in the senses. Whereas the moon represents the senses in general, Venus is a planet that indulges the senses. Venus is also referred to as the philosopher of the senses. Why is Venus the philosopher of the senses? Because Venus is the guru of the senses. Whereas Jupiter is the guru of the spirits. Let me write that down somewhere. Venus, the priest of the senses, whereas Jupiter, the priest of the spirits. But they are both philosophers. They are both Brahmin. Still waiting on you guys' interpretations. Curious to hear. Venus is outwardly solar and inwardly corrosive. Any ideas? Thus, the planets in the house fourth from the house of Saturn is placed in signifies emotional distance from the people signified by the planets placed there. I think I've heard that idea before. Fine S says, like Cinderella and her stepmother and her false sisterhood. I see it now. Okay. Yes, you are still yapping about Saturn. That's fine. Venus represents purification. Purification, purification, purification. All right, let's go. Why does Venus represent purification? Can you elaborate a little bit? Can you elaborate a little bit as to why does the Venus represents purification? I'm curious to see that, but I'm also curious to see how that relates to this year. All right, let me begin. Let me begin. What does it mean for Venus to be outwardly solar? First and foremost, the sun is a planet of perception. So Venus loves to perceive. It perceives a lot. Venus loves to perceive. Venus is also a planet of beauty. Let me come back up here. Venus being outwardly solar suggests that it loves to perceive because it's all about indulging the senses. It is also a planet of beauty. And from a mystical perspective, beauty is light. Beauty is light. The more light you have, the more beauty you possess, right? Venus is outwardly solar and inwardly corrosive. So Venus first starts by perceiving things and then it tastes things. Because perception relates to the sun and relates to light, but to actually physically taste things relates to the earth. Because you're breaking things down. You're breaking things down with your tongue. Venus is outwardly solar but inwardly corrosive because first it starts by perceiving and then it tastes. Right. But here's another thing about Venus. Venus is a planet that starts off beautiful but can end up ugly. Why is that? Why can Venus start off beautiful but then end up ugly? All right, so I just said, right, that from a mystical perspective, beauty is light. Beauty is light. And light is also related to the eye. But do you guys know the number one sin, I suppose you could say, the number one sin that most attacks the light of a person? The number one sin that most attacks the light of a person is lust. It is lust. What are a few references to this? There are several references in the Bible, like in the book of Matthew. The book of Matthew, and what it says about eyes and lights. The eye is the lamp of the body. All right, let's check this out. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. What is another Bible verse? What is another Bible verse? If your right eye causes you to sin. If your right eye causes you to sin. All right, let's do King James. And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not thy whole body should be cast into hell. All right then. So, mystically speaking, the eye is also related to light, but the eye is also related to the genital organs. The genital organs. Let's go back to the Kabbalah. So in the Kabbalah, see over here, In the Kabbalah, this path over here is called it's called path 26. And path 26 is connected to the letter Ayin of the Hebrews. And the letter Ayin translates to I. It translates to I. But look at this image over here. In the Kabbalah, the letter Ayin is related to the I, but it's also related to the phallus. And as we can see, the devil card, which also relates to this path, is also related to the phallus. So there's a connection between the I, light, and the phallus. And when the I is assaulted by lust, the I loses its light, right? We were just seeing here that the eyes are related to light. And let's read over here again. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, then the whole body should be cast into hell. Over here, we're seeing a relationship between the loss of one's eye, or the loss of one's eye to lust, and then the loss of one's body. Because when you're a very lustful person, when you're a person who enjoys perceiving a lot, when you enjoy perceiving a lot, eventually what you perceive, your body will wish to go there. Everything that you perceive, your body will wish to pursue, right? And that which defiles the body the most, that which defiles the body the most is lust as well. What is that Bible verse again? It says something, it goes to the effect of, those who sin against their own body, something like that. Let's read the New International Version. Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. And so, within the biblical tradition, there's a relationship between beauty and keeping away from lust, and there's a relationship between ugliness and completely indulging oneself in lust. And even in the Vedic tradition, we see this because we see that the deity of Purva Palguni lost his own eye and became lame when he was caught indulging as well. So Venus is a planet that starts off very beautiful, very beautiful, very beautiful. But through indulging and indulging and indulging and indulging and indulging and indulging and indulging, it starts to lose its luster, right? And so that's one negative expression of Venus, is that through extreme indulgence, you end up losing your luster. So now, let us come up with a few more interpretations. One negative interpretation of Venus that relates strictly to its solar aspect is somebody who, their whole lives, they only ever perceive things that they want from the far, but they do not have the strength to pursue them. Or maybe it's not that they don't have the physical strength to pursue them, but for whatever reason, they cannot pursue them. They live their lives perceiving and perceiving and perceiving, but they never get what they're perceiving. The sun is disconnected from the cross. That is one very negative expression of Venus. A person just lives their lives perceiving, but they never achieve the thing that they are perceiving. That's one negative expression. All right, let me check the chat for a little bit. All right. Negative manifestation of Venus is when they please only their own senses rather than being generous with it. That is another legitimate negative expression, yes. Venus, the bogey, the guru of the indulgence, exalts in the sign of Jupiter, can only manifest most positively when under the guidance of Jupiter, okay? Or pouring their Venusian qualities into art or things that others can also be pleased with, like a tree that bears fruits compared to a tree that bears no fruit and depletes the soil of nutrients. All right. Venus is about enjoying beauty, finer things, harmony. So for those things to exist, some unwanted things have to be rejected, purified. Oh, is this what you were talking about when you're saying purification? All right, interesting. Oh, but what you said also, we can immediately apply to this idea. Venus is about enjoying beauty, finer things, harmony. So for those things, we need severity. We need some unwanted things to have to be rejected. All right, that's another interesting interpretation. Right? In order to please the eye more, sometimes we have to be severe with things that we don't like and pluck them out and destroy them, right? Because the cross is also represents destruction. So to better please our senses, we have to destroy things. There are some things that need to be destroyed. We need to say no, reject those things, and move away from them. All right. I see that. Venus has the cross at the bottom also. Why would the eye be related to the sexual organs? These verses point to the Ajna chakra, the land of milk and honey, the purity and pineal. It is also related to the sexual organs because there are various ways in which they are related to the sexual organs. I even have notes somewhere. Where do I have those notes? Let me think for a few seconds. Okay, I think I know where. In my contemplations for Bhuvaneshwari, I was writing various things. But let me come into that. I wrote a lot of things here. First and foremost, in the mystical Kabbalah, in the tradition of the Kabbalah, the eye is also related to the phallus. It is also related to the genital organs. You have to consider this path over here, path 26, and Ayin, right? And also down here, this same path is related to the lingam and the yoni. Let me see if Ayin is related to the... It is related to the phallus, but I'm not sure if it's directly related to the phallus. It is related over here. But now let me check my notes over here. We know the Bhaga is related to Bhaga himself is related to the phallus. And his eye was lost when he was indulging. There are various stories that relate lust to the eye, and the loss of the eye with the destruction of lust as well. There are various references, but I don't want to get too deeply into all of that right now. But I think in a later video I'll write that. And also on my Patreon, let me just go to my Twitter. If you want more references between the eye and the phallus and lust, you should check this Patreon post that I made about how to control women. Because over there, I discussed that a lot and things like that. But yeah, I'm actually surprised that you actually don't know that, because it's actually a very common thing within mysticism to relate the eye to the phallus and to the genital organs. But anyway, right eye symbolizing the masculine. Yes. Oh yeah, that's a very good point. I didn't even think of that, because usually men are the ones who are more guilty of lust, right? And it specifically says the right eye. That's interesting. Yes, guys, like the videos, please. Also mentioned in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika that conservation of semen results in luster of the eyes, or eyes full of milk. Absolutely. In fact, it's very much understood in Ayurveda that is the case. I don't know what this means. IRIC. I don't know what that means. Would Venus-ruled nakshatras suffer from that perception and accumulation of karma, but struggle to quench their thirst? I'm not sure if I understand this comment. Would Venus-ruled nakshatras suffer from that perception? You mean indulging too much in the senses and accumulation of karma, but struggle to quench their thirst? Yeah. Venus nakshatras have a lot to do with hedonism and a lot to do with never being satisfied, because the eye itself is never satisfied. It is often said that the eye is never satisfied, and lust is something that is never satisfied. Oh, I'm convinced of the eye relation. Now, thank you, Darso, but repeat them if you'd like. If you like, I'm glad to go over it again. All right. Where was I? I think we can move over to Mars now. All right. Mars is the cross on top, but the sun in the bottom. Mars glyph. Yes, Mars is the cross on top and the circle in the bottom. All right, so you remember what I said about Venus. Venus is a planet that can start off beautiful, but waste itself, right? Because indulgence is swallowed up. Because through indulging, it loses its light. What eats the light of a person up the most, what destroys the body of the person the most, is indulgence. So Venus is a planet that starts off beautiful but can end up ugly. Mars is the opposite. Mars is the planet that can start off ugly but end up beautiful. Because Mars has a lot to do with discipline. Restriction. Mars is a planet that relates to fire, and fire relates to tapas, right? Tapas. I'm sure some of you probably don't know what tapas is. What is tapas? Whenever you're performing spiritual exercises, meditating, yoga, fasting, you are building within yourself a spiritual fire. And that spiritual fire can be referred to as tapas, right? And that spiritual fire burns impurities and brings light into your body. Let's read a little bit over here what it says in Wikipedia. There's a variety of austere spiritual meditations, blah, blah, blah. It means asceticism. It denotes spiritual practices, including meditation and self-discipline, inner cleansing to self-discipline by meditational practices. Often involves solitude. All right. So they're also talking about tapas, but they're speaking about it in a slightly different way. Let's see the etymology. Tapas is based on the root tap, meaning to heat, to give out warmth, to shine, to burn. The term evolved to also mean to suffer, to mortify the body. Oh, this is interesting. I like that. So check out how ironic this is. Venus was the planet of beauty that through indulgence made itself ugly. Mars is a planet that also relates to ugliness and asymmetry, but through mortification of the body ends up beautiful. And so there's a relationship. I mean, from a very basic terrestrial perspective, we understand this. There's a relationship between discipline, eating well, exercising, and beauty, right? From an earthly perspective, we understand this. And those things build an inner fire. They build an inner spiritual fire. And again, mystically speaking, beauty is also light. If you remember my video on beauty in Jyotish, do you remember how I was basically saying that planets, when they're well placed, they bless with beauty? Well, here's the thing about planets when they're well placed. Planets, when they're well placed, they produce a lot of light. Well-placed planets are bright planets. They produce a lot of light. So there's that as well. All right. Mars, what else is Mars? Mars is a planet of war. Mars is a planet of war, destruction, fighting, conflicts, etc., argumentation. But Mars starts off with these qualities of war and destruction, but it ends up with solarity, with something bright. What is this telling us? This is telling us that if Mars is used correctly, if you use destruction correctly, if you use war correctly, if you use argumentation correctly, you can live in a world of peace and a world of beauty. If your society is corrosive, if it is corrupt, if it is corrosive, if it is ugly, if it is unfair, if you combat these things, if you fight against these things, right, you can end up in a society that is peaceful, that is blissful, that is... Apparently I disconnected for a little bit. I think I'm back now. Why did Mars' symbol now uses an arrow instead of a cross? To be honest, I actually do not know the reason why Mars' symbol changed from an arrow to a cross. I actually don't know the history behind that. Is there a reason the Mars symbol is kind of slanted on a diagonal angle as the other planetary symbols are straight vertical. Yes, Mars, out of all the planets, is a planet that represents asymmetry. Mars represents asymmetry, which is the reason why its thing is so slanted. Mars is asymmetrical. Mars is asymmetrical. It's one of the reasons why Mars and Saturn are both planets that traditionally relate to ugliness. Not to say that if you're Martian, you're ugly. That's not what I'm trying to say. There are many Martians that are absolutely beautiful, many Saturnians as well. But traditionally speaking, right, they relate to ugliness. Saturn really relates to dullness, but Mars is really what creates asymmetry. It creates scars in a person. It creates eyes that are not perfectly aligned and things like that. And so Mars has a lot to do with asymmetry. I think it's because it points towards the right. Some people say the left side of you is the feminine side and the right is masculine, but it's diagonal and upward, aka the rising masculine. Oh, this is also a very interesting interpretation. This is a very interesting interpretation. I never thought of it that way, DT. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. The planets that we're not really going to be discussing too much are the actual sun and the actual moon, because these are the base alchemical elements that the other ones are composed of. So yeah, we're not going to be discussing that. There's also not often too much discussion on Mercury, which is the moon on top, followed by the sun, and then ending in the cross. But I think contemplating this is also interesting. Because what this symbolism is telling us is that Mercury starts off through receiving, and then through this receiving, it realizes something. And then after realizing, it applies it. Because Mercury is a planet of skill. So first it is given learning, and then through that learning, there's a light bulb that sparks up. It has a light bulb moment. My drawings are pretty, yeah. This is supposed to be a light bulb, if you can tell. It receives knowledge, it gets a light bulb moment, and then through that light bulb moment, it starts to apply things. Yeah, basically that. Would you say that Mars is the way from asymmetry to symmetry, from chaos to order? Yes, absolutely. Mars at its best does that. Mars at its best is actually very self-controlled. It feels a lot of anger inside of it, but it controls its anger a lot. Because people who are very Martian, especially people who have Mars in the first house, or even Mars in nakshatras, they are very neurotic. They are given to a lot of emotions, actually, but they're very neurotic and they're very given to anger. But Mars at its best really can control that anger. Yeah. Mercury is also androgynous. Yes, that's such a good point, because no other symbolism, no other glyph has simultaneously the moon and the sun. No other glyph has that. So yeah, Mercury being androgynous makes a lot of sense. Why does what get corrosive? I don't know what you're talking. Oh, you mean Mercury? Remember, the cross represents corrosion, but it also represents the earthly plane. It represents Earth. It represents the plane of the seasons. Spring, summer, fall, winter. And so it represents the plane of application. When you see the cross, it has a lot to do with application, doing things within the physical. So all the planets, they need to relate to the cross to some extent in order to operate within the physical plane. Could you explain how Jupiter is lunar yet abundant and giving through its alchemical symbol? Why isn't solar like Venus's symbol, and yet the former is masculine while the other is feminine? The moon is the number one planet that gives. The moon is the number one planet that gives. It gives and it nourishes. You know what I mean? The sun does not give like the moon gives. Actually, according to some people, is that the sun gives so much that it actually burns you. Because I'm sure some of you know the story of the sun's wife. I forgot what the name of Surya's wife is, but he was so bright and so shining that she literally could not handle his heat. This is why we say in astrology that the sun is actually a malefic, right? Because the sun, wherever it's placed, it burns the signification of that house. The moon is really the giving planet. It's really the planet of abundance. It's really the planet that fills a person, So, yeah. But if it's been discussed already, then never mind. Lol. Ha ha ha. Yes, my name is Dersu. Hello. You guys, I think I'm going to end this stream, but I'm not sure if you guys would like to talk about something more. If there's something else you guys would like to talk about, maybe I could hang out for a little bit longer. I don't know. Oh, I don't know if it's raining where you guys are, but it's really raining hard here where I am. It's been raining for like the last 10 hours. Ah, yes, the names of the sun's wife, right? Are those her names? Surya wife. No, not you. Vedic. Yes, I'm actually more familiar with this name. I'm more familiar with this name. And then there's Chaya as well. Yeah. More familiar with that. I use Lahiri Ayanamsa. The symbols of the outer planets, I don't really know. I don't study with the outer planets, so I don't really do that. But let's check out the outer planets. The outer planets. Neptune. Neptune glyph. Okay, Neptune is the trident. Neptune is the trident. Yeah, I'm not sure what to do with this. I can see that it has a cross in the bottom, but the top, that's not the moon. That's not the moon. That is most definitely a trident. I mean, obviously, from a Vedic perspective, we know that the trident has a lot to do with masculinity because Shiva has a trident. We know that in the Vedic context, Shiva has the Trishula, right? And we also know that the mantra of the Trishula is the Trim mantra, right? I'm not sure if Google knows this, but the Trim mantra is the mantra of Trishula, of Shiva's Trishula. I'm not sure if there are sources on the internet that show this. Oh, look. A Spotify thing. And Trim is also the seed mantra of the Trishula. Okay. The mantra theme is good for taking us across difficulties and overcoming inimical forces. Yeah, see, I'm not sure if this is the interpretation because Shiva's Trishula is a sign of masculinity, of force, of war, of destruction, of overcoming enemies. But from what I remember of Neptune in the Western astrological understanding of Neptune, isn't Neptune like a feminine planet that has to do with illusions and things like that? Yeah, I'm not sure how to interpret that. I don't work with Neptune. Let's check out Pluto. Okay, I think this could be considered the sun on top. Then there's a cross. And then, is that the moon? Sun, moon, and then cross? Sun, moon, and then cross. Well, assuming that that is sun, moon, and then cross, that would kind of like be the opposite of Mercury, because Mercury was moon, sun, and then cross. Mercury was receiving something, realizing that thing that you receive, and then quickly applying it. Over here, this could be perceiving something very, very abstract, very, very divine, trying to interpret that very abstract, very divine thing. That's where the lunar aspect comes from, interpretation. And then perhaps trying to apply and communicate it. And isn't Pluto the planet of... What does Pluto represent in Western occultism, Western astrology? Western astrology, Pluto in astrology, I don't know. Pluto has recently been... I'm not sure if this thing's going to help us. Pluto, Pluto, Pluto. Rebirth. Power. Transformation. Yeah, I don't know about that. What other external planet is there? There's also Uranus, right? Uranus glyph. Uranus glyph. Uranus glyph. Uranus glyph. Yeah, I don't know what to do with this. You could say that these are two moons in the sun. This is... I don't even know what Pluto is supposed to... what Uranus is supposed to... Isn't it supposed to be the planet of originality or whatever, because it was supposed to be related to Aquarius or something like that? When I look at this glyph, to be honest, it makes me think of science, actually, because it makes me think, let us assume that this means moon, cross, and sun, right? So two moons, suggesting that this is a very receptive person that receives from various sources, not just their own culture, but even outside of their culture. And then because of the cross also has a lot to do with experimentation, experimentation. And so it receives from various cultures, and then it experiments a lot. And then through these experimentations, it discovers something completely new and completely different. So maybe that has something to do with Uranus. I don't know. I have no idea. I don't investigate that. Could you talk more about the differences between the sun and the moon? How is the moon more giving, considering the sun is just radiant 24/7? Yeah, the sun is radiant, but the sun burns and burns things away. Many astrologers say that, like, when the sun is in a house, it basically burns away the significations of that house. Whereas the moon actually gives, actually nourishes, and actually makes things grow. The sun's light are so hot and so burning that they can quite literally destroy things. You know what I mean? The sun's own wife couldn't even stand being close to him, basically. And so I can understand that. I'll rewatch your life since I was so late. Also, could you touch upon the nodal symbols? I don't know much about it. Oh, we didn't talk about the nodes, did we? Cross and moon, or half a sun. I'm not sure if I know what you're talking about. Sorry to bring this back to the sun, but what did you mean by it gives till it burns out? You mean burn the ones who receive it? Just a bit confused by that bit. Yes, it can do that. Like, let's say you have sun in the first house, for example. It can dry you out. If you have sun in the first house, you could actually get older quicker. You know, you start out very, very bright, very, very solar, but you start to wrinkle very, very early. Somebody who has sun in the first house can actually start wrinkling very, very early, for example. And their skin, they could get sunspots, things like that. But Saturn in the first house, if it is well placed, can actually make a person who stays younger for a very, very, very long time. So that's very interesting. Saturn is technically speaking the planet of older people, right? But people have Saturn in the first house when it's relatively well placed. Those people stay young for a long time. But people with sun in the first house, they tend to age much more quickly, physically. They age much more quickly, for example. Neptune translates to Poseidon, which has a trident, yes. Trim is linked to Jupiter. Trim is one of the mantras that can heal Jupiter, because Trim is a very hot and very burning mantra that can burn away Jupiter's fat a little bit. Why sun nakshatras can be such liars when sun breaks through illusion? Why can sun nakshatras be such liars when it breaks through illusions? You know what? I have more sun nakshatra videos coming. And in those sun nakshatra videos, I can explain that much better. In those videos, I can explain it much better. But it has a lot to do with the sun's antisocial nature. Pro-social with its friends, but antisocial with the rest of society. What I just said is a little bit confusing, but yeah. But actually, I've written a little bit about that. I've written a little bit about this aspect of the sun on my Patreon, so you should go check that out. What are your thoughts on sun and moon touching both nodes in a birth chart? Both nodes at the same time. Ooh, yeah, that's a lot. I'm going to be thinking about that, but let me just go through the other questions. Pluto looks like a ballerina. It may look like a ballerina, but from what I understand, it's much scarier, much darker, much more destructive than a ballerina. Like an inverted Mercury, yes. Kind of the opposite of Mercury, yes. Neptune's the higher octave of Venus, supposedly. I believe Uranus is the same for Mercury. Okay. But the moon here seems to support the sun. Yeah. Explosions. Oh, I went down too quickly. And Mercury represents Lakshmi and Vishnu, respectively. Yes, that is very interesting. Pluto represents our wounds, could indicate the sun action and the moon internalizing it, which creates the wound, which leads to the cross. Okay. Okay, Aditi. The sun represents something external, the moon the emotions, and then that produces the cross. All right. We should also look at the lore of the gods and goddesses. Each of those are named after. Uranus represents shocks, sudden upheavals. Aquarius is ruled by it. Mercury has the moon on top of the sun, while Pluto held or embraced the sun like a baby. This is spot-on interpretation for Uranus. The Uranus has a scientific vibe for sure. Yippee, give us Uttarashada we need. Darso, are you self-taught or have you learned from a teacher guru? I am basically self-taught in astrology for like the last 10 years. I've been studying astrology for like a decade. I've been studying astrology for like a decade. I started with videos, and then I started reading lots of books about astrology. And then I started like writing my own notes. Like I would have like notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of various notes and notes and notes and notes. I would contemplate. And then after a long while, I decided to start a blog where I was just sharing my ideas. But all right, guys. I mean, this was a really nice stream. I know I said I was going to make streams about goddesses. I was going to do that, but then I got derailed by my schedule. So yeah, I decided to do this little live stream about this stuff for a little bit. I thought it'd be fun. I thought it'd be more relaxed, just so you guys could have a live. But yeah, I'm going to do a live about a goddess one of these days. Anyway, thank you so much, you guys, for participating in my live. Thank you so much for participating in the chat. Thank you so much for your continual support. Please support me on Patreon as well. I have an endless number of articles there that you guys can check out. That I've been writing for like 5 years, basically. I really enjoy you guys' company. It's always fun to be here with you guys. Yeah. All right then. Thank you so much. Goodbye.